This week on Act Out, breaking up from the abusive relationship with oil and gas is no easy task, but several communities in Louisiana have started divorce proceedings. Meanwhile, lawmakers push to keep the abuser at home, while the state quite literally disappears into the blue oil-slicked abyss. Finally, two community organizers join us to talk about their current fight against a dirty energy project so horrific, not even the Nazis wanted anything to do with it. From tweets to marching in the streets, this is Act Out.
Rockets! Blockade! Bulldozers swarm outside the checkpoint gate. An orange flash broke the hush and blew me into the street. I awoke next to the body of my baby. No!
Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. On Friday, March 29th, the city of New Orleans joined 6 other southern Louisiana parishes in filing a lawsuit against oil and gas companies over their role in coastal land loss. The suit aims to hold the dirty energy industry accountable for decades of drilling and dredging that has destroyed coastal barriers which naturally protect both people and ecosystems from storm surges. The suit also highlights the failure of companies to follow basic permit and/or legislative regulations, such as the Coastal Zone Management Act of 1978, which requires the restoration of damaged canals and spoil banks, and the cleaning up of hazardous and radioactive waste. Quote, oil and gas exploration and production activities have included a multitude of access canals and other activities, the failure to maintain which directly harms the coastal wetlands. And to transport the mineral riches of Louisiana to processing and refining facilities and the rest of the country, pipeline companies have gashed long, straight conduits, which again, they have failed to adequately maintain and protect, such that they have become wetlands destroying forces through the coastal zone. So, in a nutshell, the canals gashed by these companies pull in salt water, which raises the salinity of the water, leading to the death of reeds and marsh grasses. This then sets off a domino death cycle that widens the channels, which causes more die-off, which causes more widening, which causes more die-off, and you get the point, To put that into terms that we can actually consider and visualize, every hour and a half, Louisiana loses a football field's worth of land. Every few minutes, it loses a tennis court's worth. And to put that into a long-term paradigm, since the 1930s, Louisiana has shrunk by more than 2,000 square miles. If Delaware or Rhode Island has lost that much territory, the U.S. would have only 49 states. Louisiana has lost a state's worth of land in less than a century. I've mentioned this on the show before, but it bears repeating. The United States already has climate refugees, and no small number of them hail from southern Louisiana, where places like Ile de Jean-Charles has shrunk from 35 square miles to half a square mile, a loss in area of more than 98% since the 1950s. Between what the Army Corps called the harnessing and shackling of the Mississippi River, sea level rise due to climate change, and oil and gas infrastructure, Louisiana is quite literally disappearing into the water. And to give you yet another idea of what all those football fields, Delawares, and Lost Islands looks like, consider these comparative maps that were recently printed in an article by Elizabeth Colbert in The New Yorker. First, here you see what southern Louisiana looks like on your average map. However, if you were to construct an actual map that shows only solid ground, this is what that would look like. The light blue on the map indicates swamps, marshes, or wetlands, i.e. not solid ground. Here is the reality of our meddling in and destruction of nature. And so, while New Orleans has historically less oil and gas industry than the surrounding parishes, it's no wonder why they are leading this latest suit. As Jeff Hebert, a former deputy mayor of New Orleans, explained, as goes the coast, goes New Orleans. The oil and gas industry, of course, responded with the predictability of a petty ex who fears that they'll get nothing in the divorce proceedings. For instance, the pro-oil and gas business coalition Grow Louisiana's executive director, Mark Earhart, said, "Lawsuits do not build relationships. They end them." Very true, Mark. But when the relationship is based on you beating the shit out of people and planet for the falling profits of an oppressive industry, I think that lawsuit is justified. Tyler Gray, president of the Louisiana Mid-Continent Oil and Gas Association, echoed those tired abusive relationship tropes, saying unnecessary legal tactics threaten the community investment and cultural support the industry has provided for over a century, which they can now potentially lose. Oh yeah, if you leave me, baby, how are you going to provide for yourself? How are you going to survive? You need me. Seriously, someone get these guys to a set of Days of Our Lives. Still, this, much like personal abusive relationships, is hardly going to be clean or an absolute breakup. Indeed, the Bayou Bridge Pipeline, the tail end of the Dakota Access Pipeline that we've covered extensively on this show, is still trying to force its way through southern Louisiana, despite being heavily delayed due to the continued efforts of water protectors at L'Oeil Camp. Meanwhile, at a hearing last Tuesday, the top Republican on the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, the House subcommittee that's devoted to climate change, which, why are there climate deniers on that committee? That's a different story, laid out a bold and belligerent defense of offshore drilling. Garrett Graves, a Republican from Louisiana, lambasted fellow lawmakers and community members at the hearing, which focused on 3 separate bills seeking to limit or block offshore drilling in the Pacific and Atlantic waters. He claimed that those opposed to offshore drilling weren't using facts, but rather opinions to drive their disdain for offshore drilling. He said that there's no real evidence that oil drilling causes oil spills. So in other news, there's no evidence that the Earth is spherical, or that dinosaurs weren't just human pets, or that the Earth revolves around the sun, or that electing almost comically brainless dipshit half-baked ass clowns is an American tradition. Actually, there is evidence for all of those things. Truly, it's pretty much impossible to spill unless you drill. It's basic causality. Yes, as if the dredging and drilling weren't enough, there is also the spilling, and the inevitable sea level rise brought on by the eventual usage of the fuels that we extract through dredging, drilling, and spilling. You have to admit it's an elegant assembly line. As we noted last week, the connectivity of our issues cannot be overestimated. Those fighting to save their homes in southern Louisiana are part of a larger fight against not only the drilling and the spilling, but the fight against dirty energy, the fight against climate change, colonialism, capitalism, and racism. Our power comes when we recognize these intersections and rise together. Without that, we are as weak as a marsh grass in a storm surge. And to be clear, this is not about rising up against the powers that be only to perpetuate the unnatural disasters that make up our attempt to shackle and restrict nature. It's about rising up against these forces so as to create alternatives that work with nature. Because, as we can see, working against nature is not only oxymoronic, but it's ultimately a painfully losing battle. As Horace wrote in 20 BC, "Drive out nature though you will with a pitchfork, yet she will always hurry back. And before you know it, will break through your perverse disdain in triumph." If anything, let's learn from nature not only how to thrive without precipitating a 6th mass extinction, but also how to kick some serious ass. Speaking of kicking ass, our guests this week are part of a coalition in Indiana that is fighting a proposed coal-to-diesel plant in Dale. And if you're thinking, wow, what the hell is a coal-to-diesel plant? That sounds awful. It is awful, and wildly unnecessary. In fact, it's so horrifying that not even the Nazis wanted it. Here to talk more about this rare, grotesque, and worthless project proposal are Mary Hess, president of Southwestern Indiana Citizens for Quality of Life, and John Blair, president of Valley Watch. Take a look. So the proposal in Dale is for a coal-to-diesel refinery plant, which is not something you hear about often. What's the prevalence of these types of plants in the U.S.?
The prevalence of these plants in the U.S. There are none. There are none in the Western Hemisphere. There's two in the entire world. There was one in Germany back in World War II. It didn't last long, and it's interesting to note that this process, even though they brag about this process winning a Nobel Prize back in 1931, that this process lost out to what was called Fischer-Tropsch, which is a gasifying. You gasify the coal first before you liquefy it, and that won out over this Viva Combi cracker process back in Nazi Germany, and then in South Africa, whenever they were facing the same thing, the Fischer-Tropsch process was the one that won out there too. So this process apparently has some flaws in it that haven't been brought out to the public, at least at this point in time.
So what I mean, considering their non-prevalence, and considering, as you noted, that not only is it an old idea, but it's an old idea that's already been proven to be not as efficient as another one. What is this for? What's the reason that folks are saying that this is necessary?
They say it's clean coal. It's a clean process, which I think we all know there is no such thing as clean coal. And that's what they're trying to look for, is cleaner technology. But this is not the way to go, because there's still going to be the coal dust. There's still going to be the release of toxins. And, we're in a drastic change with climate, and we're going to be emitting 2.2 million tons of carbon dioxide into the air annually from this plant. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense, except for people who are in line to gain profit from it.
And that carbon dioxide figure it kind of belies the process too, because the product it's creating is diesel fuel, which when it's burned, I assume that's what the purpose of it is to burn it in diesel engines. When it's burned, it's going to release carbon dioxide too.
Because it's not just about the constructing of the plant. It would require the construction of a pipeline for both water from the Ohio and then wastewater that would go back into the river, not to mention rail cars filled with coal and sodium sulfide.
You mentioned the water. There's actually rumors going around that they're wanting to take the wastewater to Huntingburg, which is about 6 miles north of Dale. And they're wanting to release that into their lake where they get their drinking water from.
Yeah, so consider this. The state of Indiana, through Indiana Economic Development Corporation, which is headed by our governor, is proposing to Huntingburg, Indiana, a town of about, 3,000 or so people.
Not sure.
Like she said, 6.5, 7 miles northwest of the site. They're trying to convince the town of Huntingburg that this wastewater from this plant is good for their drinking water. And right now they get drinking water from what's called Patoka Reservoir, and they have a 50-year contract with Patoka Reservoir to take their water. And that is good water, at least now it is. Water sources can always be contaminated easily. But, it's one of the most bizarre proposals I've ever heard. Here, take this. And why are they doing that? Because it is 7 miles maximum to build this pipeline to that Huntingburg drinking water lake, and it's 20 miles to build a wastewater pipeline back to the Ohio River. So they're wanting to save this company a few $1 million of pipeline construction, I'm sure the people of Huntingburg are just excited about it, the prospect of being able to get their drinking water from the wastewater of a coal refinery.
And this is 1.8 million gallons of water a day that they're going to be bringing up from the Ohio. And so this would be 1.8 million after it was cleaned going to Huntingburg. And you consider that day after day, that's a lot of water even going back into their reservoir.
I mean, you mentioned that people are just overjoyed, but what has been obviously you folks are combating this, but what has been the response? I know that oftentimes these companies will come with these, big smiles and say, hey, it's good for the economy, or, we need jobs, and no, it's not going to be that dirty. Like, what has been the public's response to this?
I'm going to estimate, because we've canvassed several of the towns around the area, and I'm going to estimate about 80% of the people are against it, but it's being shoved down our throats.
So what, in terms of the process, is there any sort of eminent domain cases that might come up that would further gunk up their process, or how does this look in terms of the community land and process?
It's all private land that they obtain. They have options on private land. So,
and as far as eminent domain is concerned, there will be eminent domain if they build that water line to Huntingburg. There will necessitate eminent domain proceedings on whatever land is in between. It's unsure about the water line, the water supply line, as well as the water waste line that goes back to the river. It's unsure about eminent domain on those because they might potentially use the existing right-of-way that US 231 operates on now, because it pretty much follows that path.
So where are they at in the process? I know you said that they hadn't updated their site, but where is this in terms of the permitting process and the potential to get started on construction?
The Indiana Department of Environmental Management is now looking. They have a draft permit. We had a hearing on the 1st of December, on December 5th, and there was 47 people that spoke in objection to the plant and 7 people who spoke for it. And now it's in IDEM's hand, and they're supposed to be responding to all our questions.
And you have to understand that IDEM, back in 2005, when Mitch Daniels, who was governor, he appointed a guy named Tom Easterly as the head of IDEM, and he went around to all the legislators and said, well, IDEM's now an economic development agency. And that's why they see their job is to enhance economic development and to issue permission to pollute. That's how they see their job.
Our organization has had 3 forums, and right before our 3rd forum was the 1st of November. And at the end of October, IDEM issued a statement that this plant would have no significant impact on health in the area. This is from IDEM, who has no health officials on their staff, and they do not correlate with the state health department. We had one of our people approach the town board president, and she asked him why you didn't do more research. And his response is, well, they told us that would just be steam coming out of those pipes. Right. They didn't bother to do any research at all.
And of course, we can see across the country what happens when you just take the corporation's word for it.
Right, and it's like they're listening to a used car salesman trying to sell them a car, but they're not kicking the tires at all.
Coal, oil has its problems digging it out of the ground too, drilling and so forth. But coal leaves massive scars on the landscape. Mm-hmm. It starts out, if you strip mine it, it's horrible. If you underground mine it, it's horrible. It pollutes the groundwater. It pollutes the surface water. It destroys forests and ecosystems when it's mined. It increases problems when it's used. Coal is a nasty substance that we should get away from for reasons well beyond global warming and climate change.
Well, and this touches upon another important aspect, because reports have come out in the past few years that show that some of the most profitable industries like logging and fossil fuels wouldn't be profitable at all if they actually had to take into consideration what people end up having to pay for, such as cleanup or, deforestation costs or pollution costs, how that affects people's health, how that affects people's access to food and things like that. So really, if you consider all of the economics of such a situation, not only does it not make economic sense, you're actually losing money in the long run because of all of the cleanup that you have to do, both in terms of land and air and water, but in terms of people and animals and that sort of thing as well.
We're fortunate. We have a couple of doctors within our group, and one of them's a published pediatrician, and she's done a lot of research on the effects of pollution on children. And in fact, we have found out that in our area, our special ed rates are even higher than the national, twice, half as much higher.
Yeah, significantly. That's the way I would
higher
put it. It varies from county to
than
county.
the national average.
And
So-
it seems to be those special ed rates are significantly higher across the Ohio Valley. What's the common thread there? I don't think it's the water from the river, because it's cleaned up before people drink it. Hopefully, Evansville is on the Ohio River water system, but it's the coal-fired power plants that line the Ohio Valley. Within 60 miles, 100 kilometers of where we're sitting right now, there is 15,113 megawatts of coal-fired electricity. If you look at a map, this is the center of the coal industry.
We are considered the sacrifice zone in southwestern Indiana. And
by the national environmental groups, I think we are too.
right. And Earth Justice really it wasn't right before Christmas, I believe, actually pinpointed the Gibson power plant and Duke as far as they were exceeding what they were allowed to be doing. So instead of IDEM even catching that, it takes an outside environmental justice group to bring it to their attention. So they don't, in my opinion, IDEM does not regulate. Once a permit's issued, it's forgotten. That's what I'm seeing around here.
And they don't pay very well too, so it's basically a training ground for people who want to go to work for industry.
Now, IDEM actually, when Riverview applied for this permit back in January of 2018, we've watched their virtual website, and IDEM actually worked with Riverview using Indiana taxpayers' money to rewrite this permit to get it to where they want it now. So I don't understand either. Why are we as taxpayers paying for IDEM to rewrite the permit for a company from Houston, Texas and Greenwich, Connecticut?
We've been dealing with these things since 1979, this coal liquefaction in particular. And like I said, none of them have been built. And I'm fully confident that this one won't be built either due to economic considerations. But the only way it will be is if Pence, Trump, and Holcomb decide to make the taxpayer fund it so it's the socialization of risk and the privatization of profit. There's one other thing I want to add too, and this is something that Mary said a few weeks ago that really has stuck in my mind. We were just watching some YouTube videos before you came on, and one of them was about why do you continue to live here? It was in Appalachia with a woman was exposed to mountaintop removal. And that's a good question to ask people. Well, Mary made a statement a few weeks ago that, well, we're fighting for our lives, John. And that's what's happening here. And it really is sad when you're fighting for your life that you don't have your elected representatives in your corner. In fact, they're in the other guy's corner.
A couple of points really struck me in this interview. First of all, that question people are so often asked when something horrific is about to happen or happens in their town that's tied to corporate malfeasance, corrupt governance, or, as is often the case, both. Why don't you just leave? I really hate that question. It's such a stupid question if you really think about it. Do you know how financially and physically taxing it can be to just move your entire life? It's a damn privilege to just be able to move out of a place without taking into consideration the costs of finding a new home, or let's say your house is underwater, either literally or figuratively in the financial sense. Let's say that you have no job prospects, except in the town that you're in, etc., etc. Furthermore, and perhaps more importantly, is the question, why the hell should we have to leave our homes just so that a corporation can destroy them? Why is the burden on us to have to move out of the way of large-scale destruction and pollution rather than it being socially and politically unacceptable to destroy entire communities because some jackass wants a bigger yacht? At what point do we say, you know what, No, this is my home. This is my neighborhood's home. This is my friend's home. Or hell, why not? This is just some nature. Some necessary nature, and you can't fucking destroy it for some unnecessary blood money project. Which brings me to that second point. That idea of the socialization of risk and the privatization of profit. Therein lies the crux, the keystone of our entire system. We're told to move or accept the risks of poison, pollution, destruction, paying for it in all senses of the word, while big business runs away with the profit won from the suffering of millions and the irreparable damage of ecosystems worldwide. It is this cornerstone that we must focus our energies on, and not be distracted by sidestepping reforms, establishment conspiracies like Russiagate, or which of the Dems is less terrible. We're not alone in our fight unless we decide to divide and diminish our power. And with that soapbox PSA, we'll wrap up this week's Dose of Dissent. For more information on the work that our guests are doing, listen to the whole interview on our podcast that airs every Friday on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and Libsyn. And be sure to check out that last slide and the show description to see links to their pages. Reminder, the best way to stay up to date on our work is to sign up for our newsletter at the address below. To those who have donated, thank you so much for keeping us acting out. Please spread the word about that as well so that we can keep acting out. From the Devil's Den, good night and act out. And real quick, to keep independent, non-corporatized media like this show going, visit patreon.com/actout.
I can hear the boots are stomping. Come on, boys, let's get some rocks to throw. I can't stand to hear my father cry anymore. Time we left one of you motherfuckers dead in the road. We've been begging up inch by inch, we got nowhere else to go. It's been too many years since you pushed and served my shove. I'm not a